Emma Rivers was 28 years old when she set off on a solo backpacking trip across Southeast Asia. A free spirit with a passion for adventure, she was the kind of person who never let anything hold her back. From the moment she left her small town in Oregon, she had a burning desire to see the world. Her Instagram account was a collection of vibrant photos, picturesque landscapes, vibrant markets, serene temples, and local encounters, all captured with her. She had always dreamed of backpacking through Asia, and now, as she arrived in Thailand, it felt like she was finally living that dream. Emma's plan was simple: explore the countries, learn the cultures, and share her journey with her followers. She was always very active online, posting regular updates, sharing tips for other travelers, and connecting with people from all over the globe. Her posts were filled with enthusiasm, as she described every new place with excitement. By the time she reached Thailand, she had already visited several countries and felt increasingly comfortable in the world of solo travel. Her destination this time was Koh Samui, a tropical island known for its beautiful beaches, lush jungles, and laid-back atmosphere. Emma had heard about a remote hiking trail on the island, a path less traveled by tourists, where you could discover hidden beaches and ancient temples. The thought of exploring untouched nature on her own thrilled her. She was prepared as always. Her backpack was packed with all the essentials: water, snacks, her camera, a map, and her journal. On her first morning in Koh Samui, Emma posted a picture of herself standing at the edge of a cliff, the turquoise sea stretching out before her. She captioned it, "Waking up to paradise." It was a sunny, clear day, and she was excited to venture out into the jungle. According to locals, it was a peaceful area, perfect for solo hikers. Emma had a keen sense of safety and was used to traveling alone in unfamiliar places. She always researched ahead of time and made sure to stay connected with someone when venturing into more remote areas. That day, she texted a close friend, sharing her plans to hike and telling them she would be off the grid for a few hours. She set off down the trail, her footsteps muffled by the thick jungle foliage. The dense trees offered a welcome shade from the sun, and she marveled at the sounds of the forest. Birds chirped from above, and the occasional rustle of leaves signaled small creatures moving through the undergrowth. Emma loved the sense of solitude, the peacefulness of being surrounded by nature. She was in her element, far from the noise of city life. But as the hours passed, Emma's usual posts began to slow down. Her followers, who were accustomed to her frequent updates, began to notice the silence. They weren't overly concerned at first. After all, she had mentioned that she would be offline for a bit. But as the day turned into night, concern started to set in. Emma's phone was off, and her friends and family had no way of reaching her. The next day, her family tried to contact her, but there was no response. Her last known location was in Koh Samui, and her social media feed had gone quiet. It wasn't like Emma to disappear without a trace. Her parents, confused and increasingly worried, contacted the authorities. A search was launched in the hopes of finding any sign of her, but as the hours ticked by, a grim reality began to sink in. Emma Rivers, the vibrant traveler whose updates had captivated thousands, was missing. Days passed, and the sense of dread surrounding Emma's disappearance only deepened. Her family, who had once marveled at her adventurous spirit, were now gripped with panic. Emma's mother, Claire, constantly refreshed her phone, waiting for any kind of message or sign that her daughter was okay. But the messages never came. Emma's father, Thomas, contacted the local authorities in Koh Samui, asking for assistance in locating his daughter. They assured him that a search would be launched immediately, though they too were troubled by the lack of information surrounding her disappearance. The search began with the areas Emma had last visited, the trail she had planned to hike, the nearby beaches, and the dense jungles surrounding the island. Teams of local police and volunteers combed through the thick underbrush, hoping to find any clue that could lead them to Emma. The island's remote nature made it a difficult location for such searches. The jungle was dense, with towering trees and winding paths that could easily confuse a lost traveler. There was also the concern that Emma might have gotten lost, disoriented by the unfamiliar terrain. As the search effort continued, rumors began circulating. Some suggested that Emma might have gotten into trouble with the local wildlife, while others whispered about potential accidents along the trail. Still, no trace of Emma was found. For those close to her, this silence was haunting. Emma had always been cautious, and her preparedness for hiking in unfamiliar areas was something her family and friends knew well. The idea that she could simply vanish without a trace seemed impossible. On the 7th day after Emma's disappearance, a breakthrough came, but it was not the outcome anyone had hoped for. Two hikers, a couple from Germany, were walking along a less traveled path near the southern part of the island when they stumbled upon something unexpected. At first, they thought it might have been an abandoned animal, but as they approached, they realized with growing horror that it was a human body. The body was partially hidden under a blanket of leaves and vines, as though someone had tried to conceal it in the dense foliage. It was Emma. Her clothes were torn, and there were visible bruises on her arms and face. Her body was cold, and there were signs of a violent struggle, scratches and marks from what appeared to be an attempt to flee. Her backpack, a staple of her travels, was missing, as were her belongings, including her phone and camera. The couple immediately called the authorities, who arrived within minutes. The area was secured and the investigation began. Emma's body was carefully examined and the scene was processed for evidence. There were no signs of an animal attack, and it became increasingly clear that this was not an accidental death. Emma had been the victim of a brutal assault. The authorities suspected foul play, and soon it became apparent that she had been targeted. While the scene itself was chilling, the discovery of Emma's body only raised more questions than answers. Why had she been attacked? And who would do such a thing to a young woman who was merely exploring a new country? The more the authorities examined her body, the more troubling the findings became. Her injuries were consistent with a violent altercation. The sight of her body in the jungle, so far from any known trail, made it clear that her death was not an accident. It was a deliberate act. Emma's family, still in shock, were notified, and the horror of losing their daughter in such a cruel and senseless way began to set in. The search for answers had now become a search for a killer. The days following the discovery of Emma's body were filled with mounting tension and a sense of helplessness. Local authorities, now certain that Emma had been murdered, shifted their focus to finding her killer. They interviewed the hikers who had found her body, hoping they had seen something unusual or had any helpful information. However, the couple had only been on the trail for a short while and hadn't encountered anyone else during their hike. Their discovery of Emma's body was purely coincidental, and they had no further insight to offer. As the investigation progressed, the police began to look for potential suspects. Emma's social media had offered little to no clues, as her last post had been a peaceful snapshot of the cliffside. The authorities soon began to focus their efforts on tracking down anyone who had been in the area around the time of her disappearance. Emma's last known encounter, before her phone went silent, was with a fellow backpacker named Marcus Halstead. Marcus, a 34-year-old from England, had crossed paths with Emma several times on her travels through Southeast Asia. They had met at a hostel a few days earlier and, like many other travelers, had exchanged stories about their adventures. While Emma and Marcus had seemed friendly, there was something about Marcus that didn't sit well with investigators. He was known to be somewhat erratic and had recently been asked to leave a guest house on Koh Samui for disturbing behavior. His interactions with others had sometimes raised eyebrows, but there was no solid evidence linking him directly to the crime. Still, the authorities decided to question him, hoping he might have seen or heard something that could shed light on Emma's disappearance. Marcus was cooperative during the initial questioning, but his timeline of events did not align with the evidence. He claimed that he had last seen Emma 2 days before her disappearance, near a remote village not far from where her body was discovered. However, when investigators checked his alibi, they found it lacking. His account was inconsistent, and his reluctance to share further details made him a person of interest in the case. It was possible that he had been lying, and the police began to wonder if he knew more than he was letting on. As the investigation into Marcus deepened, something strange happened. Just days after being questioned, Marcus was found dead in his rented room at a guest house in Koh Samui. He had been strangled, and there were no signs of forced entry. His body was discovered by the guest house owner, who had grown concerned after Marcus had failed to show up for his checkout time. Police immediately launched an investigation into his death, and it quickly became clear that Marcus's death was not a random event. Whoever had killed him had done so with the same cold precision as Emma's murderer. The timing of Marcus's death raised more questions than answers. Had he been silenced to prevent him from revealing something important? Was there a connection between his death and Emma's murder? The authorities were left grappling with a chilling thought. Was Emma's death part of a larger pattern? And if so, what was the motive behind it all? The investigation into Marcus's murder further complicated the search for Emma's killer, and the police found themselves facing a labyrinth of dead ends and puzzling leads. What had started as a search for a missing traveler had turned into a complex and dangerous case. The authorities now had 2 bodies and no clear answers. Emma's family, still reeling from the loss of their daughter, grew increasingly desperate for answers. Every twist and turn in the case seemed to raise more questions than it answered, and the unsettling feeling that the killer was still out there haunted the investigation. The question remained, who was responsible for these brutal deaths? And why were they being carried out with such ruthless efficiency? Weeks passed, and the investigation into Emma's murder took a dark and unexpected turn. With Marcus Halstead's death adding another layer of complexity to the case, the authorities refocused their efforts. The police knew they were missing something crucial. They had 2 victims, but no clear connection between them, except for their brief interaction during their travels. They had suspected Marcus at one point, but his sudden death had thrown their theories into disarray. Was it possible that Marcus was innocent, and the true killer was still at large? A breakthrough came when forensic experts began to examine the evidence more closely. Among the items found near Emma's body, her backpack was the most significant clue. While it had been stripped of her valuables, including her passport and phone, her camera remained. The device had been smashed, but not before it had captured some footage. It was a long shot. After all, Emma could have simply been filming her hike. But the authorities decided to investigate. The footage, though shaky and incomplete, revealed something chilling. In the few moments of footage that hadn't been corrupted, Emma was seen interacting with a man she appeared to know. He was tall, with dark hair and a rugged appearance. The footage showed Emma laughing at first, her usual carefree demeanor. However, as the conversation progressed, her body language shifted. She seemed tense, uneasy even, and the tone of the interaction quickly grew hostile. The man appeared to be getting agitated, his gestures becoming more aggressive. It was clear that something had gone terribly wrong. The police quickly identified the man in the footage. Luca Ferraro, a 40-year-old Italian traveler who had been living on Koh Samui for several months. Luca was not a stranger to the island's backpacker community. He had been known to frequent the same hostels and had established a reputation among other travelers. However, no one had ever suspected him of anything criminal. He was a loner, someone who kept to himself, but always seemed to be in the background of group activity. It was this very familiarity that made him slip under the radar for so long. Investigators dug deeper into Luca's background. They discovered that he had recently been kicked out of a local guest house for disruptive behavior and had been acting strangely in the days leading up to Emma's disappearance. He had been seen following Emma around on several occasions, though it wasn't clear if he had approached her directly. Some witnesses claimed he had even offered to join her on her hike, but Emma had politely declined. The more the police dug, the more they uncovered about Luca's erratic behavior. It seemed that he had a history of getting into confrontations with other travelers. However, it was Emma's death that had pushed him over the edge. The confrontation captured on the camera had escalated quickly. Luca had become aggressive when Emma refused to engage further. The footage showed her attempting to back away, but Luca pursued her relentlessly. The attack had been sudden and violent. His motive, unclear at the time, began to take shape. Was it a robbery gone wrong, or was there something darker at play? Luca's reaction to the investigation was one of calculated indifference. He initially denied any involvement in Emma's murder, but the evidence against him was mounting. Authorities found traces of Emma's blood in his apartment, and when they searched his belongings, they found several of her personal items hidden in a drawer. Luca had tried to cover his tracks, but the evidence was undeniable. As the investigation continued, the authorities discovered even more disturbing details. Luca had been involved in other violent incidents on the island, though they had never been reported. It became clear that Emma had been his target all along. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. He had followed her, stalked her, and ultimately killed her in a moment of uncontrolled rage. The police were now determined to capture Luca. They traced his movements after Emma's murder, discovering that he had fled Koh Samui and crossed into neighboring Cambodia using a fake passport. He was no longer a simple backpacker lost in the wilderness. He was a fugitive on the run, and the hunt for him was about to intensify. Luca's disappearance added a sense of urgency to the investigation. Emma's family, still devastated by the loss of their daughter, waited anxiously for the news that Luca had been caught. They knew that the truth about Emma's final moments was now within reach, but until Luca was found, there would be no true closure. The world watched as the manhunt for the killer of the young backpacker intensified, and the chilling truth of Emma's brutal end slowly came to light. The manhunt for Luca Ferraro became an international operation. Authorities in Thailand, Cambodia, and surrounding regions were on high alert as Luca's whereabouts remained unknown. Despite his efforts to disappear, the police were relentless. They tracked his movements, piecing together his journey through Southeast Asia. Luca had traveled with remarkable precision, using fake documents to cross borders and evade detection. But his luck was running out. The investigation had gone global, and every airport, border crossing, and bus station became a point of interest. In the small rural villages of Cambodia, where Luca had taken refuge, the authorities received an anonymous tip. A local had recognized him from his photograph in the news. The fugitive, who had once blended in with the travelers of Koh Samui, was now a wanted man. His once casual demeanor was gone, replaced by desperation and fear. The tip-off led the police to a remote area near the border, where Luca had been hiding in an abandoned shack on the outskirts of a quiet village. He had been living off the radar, carefully avoiding contact with locals and keeping to himself, but his isolation was no match for the determined efforts of the authorities. On a stormy evening in late summer, Cambodian police, working alongside Thai investigators, surrounded the dilapidated shack where Luca had been staying. Armed officers moved in cautiously, aware of the potential danger of an armed fugitive. Luca was cornered. He knew there was no way out. The silence of the night was broken only by the sound of heavy boots on the mud, echoing through the village. For a moment there was stillness. Then the standoff began. Luca resisted arrest, but the police were prepared. They had anticipated that he might try to fight back, but he was no match for the team of experienced officers closing in on him. After a tense few minutes, Luca was apprehended without further violence. He was shackled and escorted back to the station, where he was interrogated for hours. His calm facade began to crack as the weight of the evidence, including Emma's camera footage, blood samples, and the stolen items found in his possession, was laid before him. Luca eventually confessed. His motives were chilling in their simplicity. He had been obsessed with Emma, and when she rejected his advances, he snapped. The footage from Emma's camera revealed a frightening escalation of that obsession, leading to her brutal murder. In his confession, Luca described how he had followed her for days, unable to control his impulses. He had planned the attack, choosing the remote trail as the perfect location to carry out his crime without witnesses. When Emma fought back, he saw it as a final act of defiance that enraged him further. He had killed her in a fit of rage, taking her belongings to make it look like a robbery. After his confession, Luca was extradited back to Thailand, where he faced charges of murder, robbery, and other crimes related to Emma's death. His trial was widely publicized, and the world watched as the details of Emma's final moments were revealed. It was a painful process for Emma's family, who had fought tirelessly for justice. Though they had found the answers they desperately sought, the pain of losing Emma in such a brutal and senseless way was overwhelming. The trial was long and emotionally taxing, but in the end, justice was served. Luca Ferraro was sentenced to life in prison, a verdict that provided some sense of closure, though it could never undo the harm he had caused. Emma's family, despite the heartbreak, vowed to carry on her legacy. They started a foundation in Emma's name, dedicated to raising awareness about the dangers of solo travel and promoting safety for women on the road. Emma's story would live on, not just as a tragedy, but as a reminder of the importance of being cautious and aware, no matter how beautiful or peaceful the destination may seem. Her murder had shaken the world, but it also sparked change. Travelers from all corners of the globe now took a moment to consider their safety more seriously, inspired by the bravery of a young woman whose life had been tragically cut short. Emma's legacy became a beacon of hope and a call for action, reminding the world that while adventure is a beautiful thing, it's always crucial to be vigilant and prepared. The memory of Emma Rivers, the fearless backpacker, would never be forgotten. The legacy of Emma Rivers extended far beyond the tragedy of her untimely death. In the wake of her murder, her family found a way to honor her adventurous spirit while turning their grief into something positive. They established the Emma Rivers Foundation, an organization dedicated to promoting the safety and well-being of solo travelers, particularly women. The foundation offered resources, support, and safety tips for backpackers, with a focus on ensuring that Emma's story was shared in order to raise awareness about the dangers travelers can face in unfamiliar territories. The foundation also worked to create partnerships with travel companies and safety experts, developing guidelines and programs aimed at helping individuals make safer decisions on their journeys. Emma's parents, despite the immense pain of losing their daughter, found solace in knowing that her life, her adventurous, curious soul, could inspire others to travel more safely and with greater mindfulness. Her memory continued to live on in the hearts of those who knew her and through the countless lives impacted by the foundation. Emma's story, though marked by a heartbreaking end, ultimately became a symbol of resilience and the importance of spreading awareness, ensuring that her untold adventures inspired generations to come.